The fight over the 2025 budget is finally over. The government is funded through September 30th. A shutdown has been averted. The continuing resolution signed into law by Trump Saturday. Funding stays at 2024 levels. These are the levels negotiated when Joe Biden was president. These are the spending levels negotiated when Chuck Schumer was majority leader because Democrats controlled the Senate. It's pretty much the 2024 budget. It cuts spending by about $13 billion, but increases spending for defense by about $6 billion. So we're looking at about, let's say, $8 billion in cuts, which is not a lot considering 2025, the budget was $7 trillion. This is the continuing resolution that passed the House on Tuesday by a vote of 217 to 213. Friday, the Senate, by a vote of 54 to 46, passed the House's version of that continuing resolution after Senate Minority Leader Democrat Chuck Schumer of New York urged his colleagues to avert a shutdown, bite the bullet, vote for it. Schumer said there were a lot of things in the continuing resolution he didn't like, but he added a government shutdown would be far, far worse. Democratic Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania and Democrat from Nevada, Catherine Masto, announced early they would break with House Democrats and vote for the continuing resolution. Now, this is being seen as a major break with House Democrats because only Jared Golden of Maine was the only House Democrat to vote for the continuing resolution. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is not throwing Schumer a lifeline. He is not coming to Schumer's defense. On Friday, after the vote, Minority Leader Jeffries was asked if he has lost confidence in the Senate leadership, specifically Chuck Schumer, and Hakeem Jeffries' answer was, next question. There's talk of New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez putting up a primary challenge against Schumer, who is up for re-election in 2028. She called his vote for the continuing resolution a betrayal and a massive slap in the face. So how much of this is real? How much of it is political posturing? Is there really a civil war right now inside the Democratic Party? Well, I wish there were a civil war. I hate being the adult in the room. I'm going to tell you what's going on, but I fear I'm going to sound like I'm trying to be the adult in the room, and I hate people who act like they're the adults in the room. It's the adults in the room who keep us from having Medicare for all. Playing the adult in the room makes you think you look smart, but you really are stupid. It's the adults in the room who got us into Iraq and Afghanistan. And adults in the room are stupid. So I don't want to try to sound like the adult in the room. Okay. Given that I don't want to be the adult in the room, Schumer probably did the right thing by being the adult in the room and making sure there wasn't a government shutdown. An argument could be made that those House Democrats who are angry with Schumer are merely striking poses similar to the ones the House Freedom Caucus poses. They're the hard-right Republicans who always get to vote for a government shutdown because they know Democrats will come in at the last minute and vote to keep the government open. That's how it usually works in the House. The Freedom Caucus keeps its obstructionist street cred without having to live with the consequences of a government shutdown. And now, because Chuck Schumer voted to keep the government open, House Democrats can behave like the Freedom Caucus. They can go back to their constituents, play the part of angry firebrands willing to shut the government down. But that's only because Schumer in the Senate was throwing them this lifeline of not having a shutdown on their hands. So none of this is real. In the Senate, Schumer, Fetterman, and Masto were joined by 7 other members of the Democratic caucus. You have Independent Senator Angus King of Maine. He voted for the bill, plus 6 Democrats: Dick Durbin of Illinois, Gary Peters of Michigan, Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, Brian Schatz of Hawaii, Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, and Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire. All voted for the continuing resolution, not because they were for the continuing resolution. They voted for it because they were against a government shutdown. I listen to my listeners. I read your comments, and I understand a lot of you say this was cowardice on their part, on Chuck Schumer's part. I understand a lot of Democrats are saying, shut the government down. And yes, shutting the government down does make a powerful statement. But what is that statement other than it's powerful? What are you accomplishing other than saying I'm angry, which really means I'm scared? What are you doing for your country by shutting the government down other than showing off your last remaining power in Washington? Democrats lost in November. They only have one power play, and that is the filibuster. What do you accomplish by shutting down the government with your filibuster? Some of you say it's a sign we're not taking it anymore. We're not taking it anymore. We're going to tell Republicans we're not taking it anymore by giving them exactly what they want, a government shutdown that they can now blame on Democrats. Yes, that'll show them. So, there are problems with this continuing resolution. A little perspective. We're talking about a $7 trillion budget for fiscal year 2025. There is no budget for 2025, and there won't be. Now that Trump has signed what will be the last continuing resolution for 2025, the government will have been kept open through a series of continuing resolutions without an actual official budget. This is the last time this happened was 2019. There is no budget for fiscal year 2025, and fiscal year 2026 starts on October 1st. That's where the real battle is going to be. That's where they have to address renewing the tax cuts for the richest 1%, which expire on December 31st of this year. So, in the grand sweep of $7 trillion in expenditures for 2025, the spending levels with this final continuing resolution remain, for the most part, at 2024 levels. That's what happens when you can't pass an actual budget and rely on continuing resolutions. The government stays open at spending levels consistent with the previous year's budget. The continuing resolution that just got passed changes roughly $14 billion in spending. It cuts around $8 billion while moving $14 billion around inside what is roughly a $7 trillion budget. So the battle over the continuing resolution was over $14 billion out of $7 trillion. $14 billion out of $7 trillion is 0.2% of all the spending in Washington. Are you willing to shut the government down, to give Republicans exactly what they want, with no guarantee you can get the government back open again? Are you willing to risk all that over 0.2% of the entire budget? I hate to sound like the adult in the room. I just don't think it's smart to shut the government down over 0.2% of the entire budget, especially when you just lost an election. When you have little power, you conserve the power that you still have, and you don't waste it over 0.2% of the entire budget. Okay, so to those of my listeners who think Schumer should have shut the government down over 0.2% of the budget, let's go over what's wrong with that continuing resolution. The biggest complaint I had against this continuing resolution was it slashes $1 billion out of Washington, D.C.'s budget. Washington, D.C. has no representation in Congress. It doesn't have 2 senators. It doesn't have a member of Congress. It's not a state or even a member of a state. It is essentially a colony of the federal government, and it's reliant on Congress. Much of its budget is determined by Congress, which voted in the continuing resolution to slash $1 billion from the city's budget for 2025. It's going to create about a $1 billion shortfall. Muriel Bowser is the mayor of D.C., and she said with the passage of the continuing resolution, essential services would have to be cut. But immediately after the Senate voted to pass the continuing resolution on Friday, it unanimously passed the District of Columbia Local Funds Act of 2025, which puts the $1 billion stripped from Washington, D.C. in the continuing resolution back into Washington, D.C.'s budget. Now, does that solve the $1 billion shortfall for Washington, D.C.? No, because it just got passed in the Senate. The House is still on vacation, so it has to be passed by the House of Representatives and signed into law by Donald Trump. It's a little too early to celebrate. Given that more than 43% of Washington, D.C. is black and House Republicans are racists who scapegoat, I have no doubt getting this bill passed in the House is going to be a heavy lift. Here are the major complaints against the continuing resolution that was just passed. It's not a budget bill. Budget bills are 12 separate appropriation bills that have been ironed out in both houses of Congress, and that is what the Democrats wanted. They wanted to pass 12 separate appropriations bills and have an official budget for 2025. When you have an official budget, you then end up with 12 separate appropriations bills, and each bill targets specific agencies in our federal government. For example, one of the 12 bills funds the Department of Labor. It also funds the Health and Human Services Department and the Department of Education. That's one appropriations bill, specifically covering the Departments of Labor, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Education, and congressional committees that specifically provide oversight to those departments have some say in the budgeting of their respective agencies. But because in 2025 there's no budget, because it's just a series of continuing resolutions, because of that, there are no congressional directives, that's what they're called, congressional directives included in the spending bills. Without specific congressional directives written into an appropriations bill, it leaves room for mischief within the executive branch. Congress allocates, but it is the president through the Office of Management and Budget that actually spends the money allocated by Congress. So without the congressional directives written into an official budget bill, Donald Trump and Mr. Project 2025, Russell Vought, he's the head of Office of Management and Budget, they will now take liberties and refuse to spend money even though it's been budgeted by Congress through the continuing resolutions. There are no spending directives because there's no budget. And that's going to happen. That's going to happen. That's the problem with the continuing resolution. This is not what the Democrats wanted because it gives an opportunity for Trump and Vought to create slush funds, hide money, a lot of room for mischief. And that's the way it's going to be for the rest of the year. Trump and Vought are going to attempt to impound funds, not spend funds appropriated by Congress. That's in direct violation of the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, which says the president has to spend money allocated by Congress. It's also in direct violation of the Supreme Court ruling in 1998, which ruled the line item veto was unconstitutional. For 2 years, there was a line item veto. Congress passed the Line Item Veto Act of 1996, and it partially reversed the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. It gave the president the line item veto. Congress allowed Bill Clinton, who was president at the time, they gave him the power of the pen to go through a budget after it's been passed into law and signed. They gave him the power of the pen to go line by line and go, nope, that not going to spend that, not going to spend this. The Supreme Court 2 years later ruled that the line item veto is unconstitutional because it violates separations of powers. It's against the Constitution because Congress has the power of the purse. Congress passes a law, Congress passes a budget bill, that becomes law, and the president must spend the money allocated by Congress. That's what the Supreme Court ruled. But because this is a continuing resolution, Trump and his Office of Management and Budget will be able to play games. Illegal games. They will refuse to spend money or impound money. There will be court challenges. There will be Democrats accusing Trump of violating the Constitution. That is one of the major problems with this continuing resolution that Chuck Schumer convinced Democrats not to kill with a filibuster. There were Democrats in the Senate who only wanted a continuing resolution that lasted 30 days so that an actual budget could be passed, an actual budget with 12 appropriations bills that would make it harder for Trump and Russell Vought over at the Office of Management and Budget to impound funds. But here's the problem with the 30-day continuing resolution that Democrats wanted. It wasn't on the menu. It wasn't being served. In order to get a 30-day continuing resolution, the Democrats would have had to vote to shut the government down and then wait for the House of Representatives to return, next week? While the government is shut down, and then hope that both chambers, controlled by Republicans, would somehow agree to a 30-day continuing resolution so that they could then pass a budget bill. Not on the menu. It would have been nice to have that. The Republicans weren't going to go for that. Had Chuck Schumer, as some of my listeners said, if he grew a spine and shut the government down, that's what Republicans wanted him to do. They want a government shutdown so they could use the government shutdown to concentrate more power in the executive branch. And at the same time, blame it all on Democrats for killing Friday's continuing resolution. That's the political calculus that Chuck Schumer used, urging members to vote for Friday's continuing resolution. There is what you want, and then there's what you can get. Our side lost in November. The only power in D.C. right now that Democrats have is to filibuster some bills to death. But it's not smart to exercise power just to exercise power, especially when doing so gives Republicans exactly what they want: a government shutdown. The other legitimate complaint against voting for Friday's continuing resolution is it cuts the Army Corps of Engineers funding for construction projects by 40%. It cuts funding for research at the National Institutes for Health by 50%. It cuts $700 million out of housing and urban development. There are also cuts in election security And there's a $185 million cut in our nuclear non-proliferation program. So I'm a rageaholic. I can't even tell you what I did yesterday when I was on the phone with my bank trying to get a fee reversed. To my credit, they did reverse the fee, but I wasted 2 hours over what amounted to $25, which is a lot of money. And I would do it again because I'm a rageaholic and a bit of a phone bully. It's great to be right. It's great to feel righteous and stand up for yourself. You feel powerful. And I felt powerful standing up to my bank yesterday. But is that real power? Is it? We want to feel powerful. Rage is the illusion of power. It's why we drop bombs on Baghdad. That's a powerful statement. It's showing the world who's boss, but then there are the real world consequences. You can show the world who's boss, but the world has a way of showing you're not really the boss. The reality of the continuing resolution is Democrats are not the boss. They could shut the government down and try to show Republicans who's the boss. Republicans are the boss right now. Our side lost in November. And yes, Senate Democrats have the filibuster. And yes, they could have shut down the government. But is that power? Is that growing a spine? Especially since a government shutdown is precisely what Republicans want? And they get to blame it on the Democrats. So let me ask my listeners who think the government should be shut down. Assuming we can get the government back open again, do you think if Schumer and the Democrats voted against the continuing resolution, do you think they have the power, after shutting the government down, to get the government back open with a continuing resolution that we as Democrats would find acceptable? I don't think they do. I don't think they have the power to get a continuing resolution passed that we would have found acceptable because we lost in November. Our power is limited. And again, shutting down the government is what Trump wants. He wants chaos. He wants chaos he can blame on Democrats. He wants a shutdown so he can invoke emergency powers. I understand the frustration with Chuck Schumer, but you can't exercise power you don't have. We don't have a majority in the Senate. We don't have a majority in the House of Representatives. We don't have a majority in the Supreme Court, and we don't control the White House because we lost. And I know the reason we lost is because we don't have a spine. But shutting down the government is not a sign of strength and backbone. It will just reveal what little power our side actually has. Again, we can shut the government down, or we could have. It's not going to happen. But it wasn't going to reopen on our terms, assuming it was going to reopen because we lost in November. We didn't win the House back. We lost the White House, and we lost the Senate. We lost. Dealing with reality isn't weakness. Acknowledging your limitations isn't spineless. Shutting the government down would have felt good for 30 seconds. And then it would have been, okay, now what? And again, it's not a show of force. You're not growing a spine by giving Republicans exactly what they want. A government shutdown would only make things worse than they already are. And I can assure you The only reason House Democrats right now are claiming to be against the continuing resolution is because they knew it would pass in the House, and then when it got to the Senate, Schumer would cave and vote for it. I don't believe there's a civil war in the Democratic Party right now. It's not real. It's a kabuki dance. It's all pretend. People pick their battles, and I'm telling you that Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and even Hakeem Jeffries, who won't admit it, in the House, they didn't think it was worth shutting down the government over 0.2% of a federal budget. Neither did Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She just had the luxury to vote against the continuing resolution because Chuck Schumer didn't. I read your comments. Many of you say shut the government down, don't give the Republicans an inch, or in this case, 0.2%. Throughout the week, I said shutting down the government is precisely what Trump and Musk want, and there's no guarantee we can get the government back open. Angus King, the independent from Maine, he caucuses with Senate Democrats. He warned that once the government is shut down, it's up to the president to decide which workers are essential and which ones aren't. That's why he voted for the continuing resolution. A government shutdown, Democrats believe, some Democrats believe, especially in the Senate, is the crisis Trump wants to concentrate power inside the Oval Office. It gives him, a government shutdown would give him license to let everybody be furloughed and keep the government shut down for months, allowing him and Musk to bring back only those employees they decide are necessary. I understand why people are stomping their feet and screaming that the Democrats need to do something. But sometimes doing something makes it worse. You can't demand the pilots fly the plane when the engines are out. The only real weapon at our disposal is the one Trump is already using, and that's the wrecking ball. A government shutdown is basically saying to Trump, hey, can you stop breaking things for a second? We need to borrow your wrecking ball so we can help you break things. Because we want to tap into the anger and frustration that plays well with our voters. Again, I hate to be the adult in the room. There are more important fights to be had. The continuing resolution was not it.